goblin jump scare. Did I get you? that can only mean one thing, friends. It's Halloween, and we've just got to be dressed for the part. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Ah, no, not like that. Juicy peeps. All right, that's better. Now that we're properly dressed, we got the ears pinned back and some of the hair redone, we're ready for the video, so hit it, Ryan. Hi friends, I'm gonna be putting on my game developer hat today to talk about this whole thing with EA getting purchased by, I'm sorry, am I reading this right? Anonymous investors from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund and Jared Kushner's Affinity Partners. Weird timeline we're in, but okay. The new owner's plan seems to lean heavily onto AI to help make up for that initial investment, with added statements about how layoffs won't be immediate. Wow, yeah, that really is the long and the short of the news coming out from that, huh? I got like 3 sentences into this whole thing, and I knew I just had to yap about it the moment I saw we're leaning on AI to make our investment worth it. For legal reasons, I don't know EA's plan, even though I've worked on games they've technically owned and crushed, but I do know enough about the marketing and development side of gaming to talk about the most likely scenarios and the state of the industry as it is right now, and even how that's been evolving over the last couple of decades. And on the note of old things, my dad used to say a broken watch is right twice a day. And we can look to everyone's favorite punching bag of a game dev, Pirate Software, to see what this busted clock has to add to the conversation.
I was watching a video that was critiquing you for mentioning you work at Blizzard so much. I literally never talk about it. When I worked at Blizzard, I did that for Blizzard. Blizzard, 7 years, yeah. Blizzard. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment. Used to work at Blizzard Entertainment. You're red team specialist for Blizzard Entertainment. And Blizzard.
Huh. Okay, maybe a different Pirate Software video. Let's try that again.
Yeah, here's the biggest sadness, dude. I worked 2 years of overtime straight on StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty. StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty made less money than the horse, the first Sparkle Pony horse in World of Warcraft. A $15 microtransaction horse made more money than StarCraft 2. That's it. That's the whole meme, dude. You're wondering why these companies do microtransactions? Because dip keep buying all of them.
Both microtransactions and loot boxes have given game companies the ability to extend the profitability of a single game far beyond initial purchases and subscriptions. In the before time, this was seen as a way for players to support developers of games that might not rely on mandatory subscription fees, but rather ask the player to make an occasional purchase or for whales in the community to shoulder the cost of continued operation. Some organizations out there still use microtransactions to do just that, but more often than not, the modern microtransaction isn't about keeping services out of the red or even in the black. It's about driving profits as high as possible with a bare minimum investment. And that's where AI really gets to shine, because in a world where assets can be more profitable than an entire IP, the button for generate stuff starts to look a lot like an infinite money glitch. We have the ability to generate everything from 3D models to pixel sprites and their animation cycles thanks to multiple out-of-the-box services. That alone right now isn't necessarily enough to generate Sparkle Pony 2.0, but it is a shortcut. I want to be so transparent with y'all right now. When it comes to the modern state of AI, these sort of asset generation tools, they're not perfect. This also applies to companies with amazing in-house models that are well trained off of every artist that has ever worked for the company while having no limits on censorship. The outputs still benefit the most from what's known as Hiddle or human in the loop. You can be confident that somewhere out there a real person is being paid to correct any mistakes made by an AI and give it just enough of a human flourish that most users won't care, but most importantly, that they won't notice to begin with. This is a highly prized skill right now, emphasis on the right now, since planned obsolescence is pretty much built into EA's future. End users are keen on what feels like AI, even when it doesn't hold any telltale signs. So anyone who can apply a little bit of Hiddle and then pass the sniff test, they're a far more valuable asset than just a touch-up artist. As an aside, all that data that's being gathered, it's really expensive human-generated data that can be then used to fine-tune these asset generation models to need less and less intervention from real people over just a few generations. So, again, to be very clear, there's no longevity here for the people actively working on this stuff right now. And hey, we've still got music, story, and code generation to talk about. These will mostly be used for cost-cutting measures, don't get me wrong, but they don't hold nearly as much potential for return on investment as something like loot boxes or a new skin. Even Riot realized this in all their wisdom many years ago when they decided to sell out to Tencent. That in and of itself has created an internal culture shift to focus more on ROI, and that push saw its peak in recent years with ideas like luxury-based marketing, where this Ari skin goes for around 500 USD. And in more recent news, Riot now partners with companies like Louis Vuitton. Okay, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to segue out of this, but alright. Let's just stick with Riot for a second, because they're somebody who actively partners or at least uses GPT on an enterprise level. Which brings up the question of how companies like Riot would benefit from LLMs and text generation models. And really, it's as simple as working as a middleman for customer service reports or monitoring chats and reports made by the player base. Think about the old tribunal system. A user reports and a group of other users evaluate the chat logs from the game. The players evaluating the chat logs get a small reward, and Riot realistically gets to cut down on their support staff. But now I think we can say if the role does exist, it's likely been given to AI, and if it hasn't, someone there is probably considering it. The goal is the same: cut costs, eliminate jobs, keep user satisfaction within reasonable limits to preserve profit. Unfortunately, reality is a little bit gloomy if you're only looking at it from the aspect of every group is out to rip off the consumer, and that really is looking like a possibility both inside and outside of the AAA scene. But if we take a look to the international stage, we can get a slightly different perspective. Japan already admits to using AI in 51% of game studios, and Western developers are not so far behind. In a recent survey at the Game Developers Conference, it was reported that nearly 1/3 of developers attending were engaging in the practice. But in Japan, AI is seen as a way to help minimize time in cross-training, do more coding in less time, improve algorithms, and further submit some admittedly painful work culture practices. It's not about keeping it hidden and disguised for the consumer base to use, but about keeping the bar of quality high enough for everyone to stay satisfied. AI can be used for game development in good faith while never charging people an arm and a leg, and plenty of big names out there have used it for entirely mundane things and quality of life improvements that have seen no direct ROI. I mean, hell, last year we saw a Valve engineer use ChatGPT to improve the matchmaking algorithm for Deadlock. That is something that actively exists within the game right now. I've even got some sneaky suspicions myself that a lot of these re-releases that have come out over the last year or are coming out are relying heavily on AI to do a lot of the lifting and get diehard fans back into playing the games that they loved. And I mean, none of this even touches on the ability for AI to be leveraged to upscale graphics, something that developers have been using for years now. Hell, even on a smaller scale, I like to try and do this too. My entire shtick is using AI to create FOSS programs, and I've even used AI to develop an ARG from the ground up that has no costs associated with it, but instead has a real-world prize pool. I've also used it to create a handful of animation programs that help in content production, and have even used it to help turn our front end for chatbots from this to this. That's a total of 3 games and half a dozen FOSS applications in just a couple of years as a mostly solo developer, with skills that have stuck with me and are going to help me tackle bigger and bigger projects. I do get that these sort of practices aren't the standard though, and people still need to put bread on the table. So I understand why for some microtransactions are important, even if I've never been able to align with the practice personally. AI is in such a weird space where the potential for good and bad lands on the developer's intent and competence. Integrity is always going to be the most important thing at the end of the day though, and when we outsource that integrity to a bottom line, our games suffer. I wish that I could say this was an AI issue that'd make things easy, black and white, plain and simple, but it's a greed issue using AI as cloak and dagger simultaneously. The gaming industry isn't changing, the industry has changed, and that dive into microtransactions over the last 2 decades have sealed the deal for this path unless consumers speak with their wallets. This didn't magically start with ChatGPT and the rise of modern AI in 2022, that just made the practice more obvious. It happened well over a decade ago when companies began to erode the public norm until microtransactions and loot boxes, they were just the standard. There is another facet to this conversation that I want to get your opinion on, friend. Does any of this even matter? Like, if a game came out and you wanted the cosmetic but found out it was AI generated and got an 80% discount compared to human generated items, would you still buy it? If a game came out that you fell in love with and 6 months later you're told that the developer had never coded before in their life but was able to vibe code 90% of the end product, would you still play? And lastly, I have to ask, does the bar for quality even matter anymore, or is it just about the human involvement? At the end of the day, this is not as complex as getting ROI out of an LLM. These assets are generated once, called good enough, and sent out, which is very different from the goal of self-improving models through RLHF. Because of this tactical split, gaming is poised to take the crown for ROI with AI for at least the next 3 to 5 years, I'd say. And for anybody who's studied gaming's love affair with artificial intelligence, you'd know that this has been going on since the 90s. It's not going to be comfortable, and unless people are outspoken and collectively make that choice not to buy the thing, this gets pushed until eventually something breaks. For an industry already at threat of collapse, and trust me, the AAA space was and still is at risk for that regardless of AI, they're ready to take on those bigger risks for the biggest payoffs. For indie developers out there using AI as a way to keep on track or from juggling too many hats, keep at it. I mean, you're more than likely not the issue, the raging hemorrhoid that is the AAA industry. However, that has got to be dealt with. On that note, folks, I think that's going to be it for me today. How are y'all enjoying October and the new animations? I've got my costume all ready to go, and I'm so excited to dress up this year. I'll be trying to keep up making some extra content for this spooky season. Words. The video was almost over, so I guess that's where we're gonna end it. See you, nerds!